It used to feel automatic. The pull, the curiosity, the urge to lean in, even when something felt just out of reach. You didn't question it. You felt it, and you followed it, because something about them felt different, intriguing, hard to read, just unavailable enough to keep you thinking. And that pull felt like chemistry, like something real was happening. But now, something has changed. You notice the same traits, and instead of feeling drawn in, you pause, you observe, you don't feel that same urgency to figure them out, to get closer, to earn something that isn't being freely given. And that difference can feel confusing at first because you recognize the pattern, but you don't respond to it the same way anymore. That pull was never random. It felt specific because it was meeting something already wired inside you, not consciously, but deeply, because unavailable people don't attract you through what they give. They attract you through what they withhold. The inconsistency, the emotional distance, the sense that something is there, but not fully accessible. And that dynamic creates a very specific internal response. It activates curiosity, focus, a subtle urgency to understand what isn't being shown. You start paying attention more closely, reading between the lines, trying to piece together what's happening beneath the surface. And that process feels engaging. It feels like connection is building, even when it's not fully present yet, because your attention is involved, your energy is involved, your emotions are being activated in real time. And that activation can feel like attraction, like chemistry, like something worth exploring. But underneath it, there's something else: familiarity, not necessarily in a conscious way, but in how your system responds to it. The uncertainty, the need to read and interpret, the effort to stay connected to something that isn't consistent. That pattern often mirrors something you've experienced before, a dynamic where connection wasn't always steady, where attention came and went, where closeness was felt, but not always maintained. And because your system has learned how to operate in that environment, it recognizes it not as unsafe, but as familiar. And familiarity can feel like attraction when it's activated emotionally. So when someone shows up in that same pattern, you don't immediately step back. You lean in because part of you knows how to navigate it, how to adjust, how to stay engaged, even when things aren't fully clear. And that ability becomes part of your investment. You don't just feel the connection, you work to maintain it, to understand it, to keep it moving, even when it requires more from you than it gives back. And for a while, that feels normal, even meaningful, because the effort makes it feel like something important is happening, like you're building towards something. But over time, your system starts to notice the cost of that pattern, the emotional energy it takes to stay engaged, the mental space it occupies, the way your focus gets pulled towards something that never fully settles. And once you begin to feel that, the pull starts to change, not immediately, but gradually, because your awareness is catching up to what your body has been experiencing all along. The shift doesn't start when you meet someone new. It starts when your body no longer responds the same way. You notice it in small moments first. Someone shows up with that same distance, that same inconsistency, that same sense of being just out of reach. And instead of feeling pulled in, you feel something else: a pause, a subtle resistance, not fear, not confusion, awareness. Because now, you're not just feeling the moment, you're recognizing the pattern. Before, you would have leaned in, felt curious, engaged with the mystery, tried to understand what was behind the distance. But now, you don't feel that same urge. You're not as interested in decoding it, not as drawn to what isn't being shown, because your attention has shifted. You're no longer focused on what's missing. You're noticing what's present or what isn't. And that clarity changes how the experience lands in your body. What once felt intriguing now feels inconsistent. What once felt exciting now feels unstable. What once felt like potential now feels like repetition. And that recognition interrupts the old response because the pull relied on you, not fully seeing it for what it was. It relied on curiosity over clarity, on interpretation over observation. But now, you're observing without trying to reshape what you see, and that changes everything. You don't get pulled into the same emotional loop. You don't feel the need to stay engaged to figure it out. You don't feel that internal push to give it time, to become something more, because you've already experienced where that pattern leads. The waiting, the overthinking, the imbalance that slowly reveals itself over time. And once your system recognizes that, it responds differently, not by reacting, but by not attaching. That's the shift. You're no longer activated by uncertainty. You're informed by it. You don't interpret distance as something to close. You see it as something to respect. You don't feel compelled to earn presence that isn't being offered. You simply notice that it isn't there. And in that noticing, your energy stays with you. It doesn't move outward to chase or understand or stabilize something that isn't stable. It remains grounded with you. And that grounded state feels different, less intense, less consuming, but far more clear because you're not being pulled into a dynamic. You're choosing whether it aligns. And when it doesn't, your system doesn't try to adjust to it anymore. It simply disengages, naturally, without force, without conflict, because the attraction is no longer being fueled by familiarity. It's being guided by awareness. This new state can feel unfamiliar at first, not because something is missing, but because something is no longer activated. You're used to feeling a certain kind of intensity, the anticipation, the emotional highs and quiet drops, the sense that something is unfolding even when it's unclear. That rhythm once felt like connection, like something meaningful was happening. But now, without that activation, everything feels calmer, more still, more grounded. And part of you might question it. Is this less? Am I not feeling as much anymore? Has something changed in how I connect? Because the absence of intensity can feel like the absence of depth if you're used to associating the two. But what you're experiencing isn't less, it's regulated. Your system is no longer responding to inconsistency as something to engage with. It's recognizing it as something to step back from. And that recognition removes the emotional spikes that once created that sense of pull. So instead of feeling drawn into something, you feel steady within yourself. And that steadiness is what makes this shift so different. Because before, your connection was partially built on activation, on responding to what was uncertain, on staying engaged, because something felt unresolved. But now, you don't need that activation to feel connected. You're not looking for something to pull you in. You're looking for something that meets you where you already are. And that changes what feels right. Consistency starts to feel attractive. Clarity starts to feel engaging. Presence starts to feel safe. Not boring, not predictable in a negative way, but stabilizing. Because your system is no longer searching for intensity. To confirm connection, it's responding to stability as something it can trust, and that trust creates a different emotional experience, one that isn't built on guessing or waiting or trying to interpret what something means. It's built on what is shown consistently over time, and that consistency allows your energy to stay relaxed, not on alert, not scanning for changes, not trying to anticipate what might happen next, just present. And that presence can feel quieter, but it's deeper because it doesn't rely on fluctuation to feel alive. It holds itself without needing constant stimulation. That's what rewiring feels like. Not a dramatic shift, but a steady change in what your system responds to. You're no longer drawn to what feels uncertain. You're aligned with what feels consistent. And once that alignment becomes familiar, you don't go back to chasing what once activated you because your body recognizes the difference between intensity and instability, between connection and inconsistency, and that recognition guides you without needing to think about it because your body recognizes the difference between intensity and instability, between connection and inconsistency, and that recognition guides you without needing to think about it. The final realization is simple, but it changes how you experience everything. You didn't lose attraction. You changed what feels like connection. For a long time, your system associated uncertainty with something meaningful. If it felt strong, it must matter. If it pulled you in, it must be real. If it made you think about it constantly, it must be worth pursuing. But now, you see that differently. You understand that intensity is not the same as alignment. That distance is not depth. That inconsistency is not chemistry. And once you see that clearly, your attraction naturally shifts. You're no longer drawn to what you have to figure out. You're drawn to what you can actually experience in real time, without confusion, without guessing, without needing to fill in the gaps. And that changes how connection feels. From the very beginning, there's no urgency to prove anything, no pressure to earn closeness, no internal pull to chase what isn't being given. Instead, there's space to observe, to feel, to let something show itself over time. And if it doesn't, you don't try to make it. You don't adjust yourself to keep it going. You don't interpret distance as something you need to close. You simply see it for what it is and choose accordingly. That's the difference now. You're not reacting to the dynamic. You're responding to the reality. And that response protects your energy without effort because you're no longer operating from habit. You're operating from awareness. You've felt what inconsistency does over time. You've experienced how it pulls you out of yourself, how it creates cycles of overthinking and waiting and trying to understand. And you've also felt what stability does, how it grounds you, how it keeps you present, how it allows you to stay connected to yourself while connecting with someone else. And once you've felt both, the choice becomes clear, not forced, not restricted, clear. You're not denying yourself something exciting. You're choosing something sustainable, something that builds instead of fluctuates, something that holds instead of disappears. And that's what makes this shift so powerful, because it's not about avoiding unavailable people. It's about no longer being activated by them. They don't create the same response in you anymore. There's no pull to lean in, no curiosity to decode, no emotional urgency to stay engaged, just awareness and choice. And that's what rewiring looks like. Not losing something, but outgrowing what once felt like it. If this resonated with you, then you're already in that shift, the one where you no longer chase what feels distant, and instead, you align with what feels consistent, present, and emotionally available. Stay with us at Depth of Us, because this space is for women who are no longer drawn to what confuses them, but choosing connections that feel clear, grounded, and real.